go.
Good evening, NNJR. Hope everyone is well. Hope everyone was able to get on with no problem and you're enjoying some of this glorious weather.
Hello. A little quiet here.
Hold on one second.
There you go.
Start from the beginning.
Yep.
Good evening, NNJR. Thank you for joining us on this call tonight. I am Shannon Muller, and I'm proud tonight to introduce a kick-ass woman who is the owner and CEO of the spectacular VIR resort, Connie, Nyholm, and the very interesting Harvey, Siegal, the original visionary of the rebirth of the VIR resort located in Alton, Virginia, that they reopened together in 2000. Connie and Harvey team are responsible for designing, creating, building, and operating the VIR resort that we all love so much. The VIR resort attracts professional and amateur drivers from all around the world and hosts 10 amateur and pro race weekends each year for both cars and motorcycles, as well as vintage racing. I know I can speak for all our NNJR DE folks who have been to VIR. We love the track and the paddock life, the first class amenities, the Oak Tree Tavern, the friendliest and kindest staff, all in a beautiful setting. VIR is a very, very special place where many of us have made wonderful memories while sharing in our passion for Porsches. Thank you, Harvey and Connie, agreeing to do this presentation for us. If anyone misses any part of this presentation, NNJR will make it available on our website, Facebook page, and YouTube channel. I'm now going to turn this over to Bill Gilbert, and Bill will be the moderator. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I'm only going to repeat Shannon's welcome and reinforce how really privileged we are tonight to have both Connie and Harvey with us. I'm dating myself, but I'm one of those NNJR people who attended VIR the first year it opened, and in 2000. And we were blown away by the amenities and by the track. And the first year we ran the North Course. The next year I was the track chair, fortunately or unfortunately, and we ran the long course, the full course, which very few clubs had ever done. And at that point, and so I got quite an education, and the VIR team has always been fantastic. And, you know, having chatted with Connie and Harvey a bit in preparation for tonight, now I know why. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Connie and Harvey and let them bring us up to date on kind of how the resurrection of VIR got started and finished, and a few, I'm sure we're going to hear more than a few war stories along the way. So with
sure
that,
you will.
Connie, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you. And Shannon, thank you for calling me kick-ass. I like that very much. I'm 61 years old and I haven't been called that much. I do kick some ass here and there. Used to kick Harvey's quite a bit back in the day, actually. But, you know, Harvey, I thought, you know, it'd be really fun to have us together because we've never gotten to do a presentation like this at the same time in real time. And the question I'm almost always asked by new people is, how did you get started? How did Harvey find us? And so I thought that would be a great opening question for you.
Well, actually, I was racing at the time with SVRA, and we were starting to lose our venues. We were starting to get kicked out because we were just a vintage club, and they were bowing to the bigger clubs. IMSA was alive and well then. Actually, it was called something else, I don't remember, but they had more professional and amateur groups that were coming in and kicking out and taking over the big dates for all the big, historic tracks. So, a developer by trade, I decided to go look and see what the other tracks were that I used to race on back in the old days. I'm the old guy in the game, so I figured, let me go back. And I looked at Marlboro, Maryland. It was a swamp by then. Bridgehampton was beautiful and wonderful, but it was no longer really viable since it was right in the heart of the Hamptons, and the most financially powerful people were within exhaust shot, if you will, and they could hear it all. Didn't want the crowds, it didn't want the noise. So then I looked at Vineland, they cut it up for a university. I took a peek also at I'm trying to remember that
And we
there's
went to
another one.
Thompson together. We went to
Yeah,
Thompson
but
together, and that's since been resurrected and reopened. And Kerrigan and I actually went there for a K&N race one weekend.
which
They did
one?
a pretty neat job. Thompson, they actually resurrected the road course and connected it to the oval, which was your very first comment when you saw it. Was like, if we could just bridge the wetlands in this one turn, we could do this. And they managed. It was good.
Well, kudos for them to do it, because I looked, and as a developer, I was daunted by it, and I know what it would take to do it, and I didn't have the stomach for it. So having run a few times at VIR back in the old days, I said, well, I'll go down, take a look. And so I showed up one day. I'm not sure you were there on that magical day at Oak Tree. Were you, Connie? I don't remember.
I started with you May 27th, 1998, and you had just dropped the ink on the contract. So I was
Okay.
with you and Larry Burnett, which is a fun story, but you found it early and negotiated with the Foote family, and I believe had to get down to Milton for a contract signing, and there were no airplanes available.
That's true. There were no airplanes, and I had one chance to make this deal. If all of those owners who had agreed to meet me at that time to discuss and sign a deal, it was going to be on that day or never. And I don't know if I can say this on YouTube or not.
Guess you'll
But I'll
find
tell you what happened. And the Spirit Airlines canceled the only flight to Greensboro that was available out of Trenton. No longer operating there at all. And so I went to the local charter guy and I said, do you have something that I can fly in? And he said, well, we have one that'll take you 4 days to get there. It goes about 12 miles an hour in the air, or this 22 passenger commuter plane. So I said, I'll take it. So I get on the plane after drinking my usual water, and I find that as I got on this plane, there were no bathrooms on it. So
Yeah.
I made it down there, but I can tell you it was not a comfortable ride. So upon arrival, I got there, signed up VIR, and then the saga began.
Yeah.
You want to hear about how we got to the Oak Tree?
Oh, what, when you and I first went down there?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I had never been to a racetrack in my life when I was introduced to Harvey by his right hand, Peggy. And Peggy and I had been two of the 7 women who started a networking group in New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut called VIR, Women in Retail Real Estate. And each of us had a different area of specialty in retail real estate, publication, mall development, shopping center leasing, property management. I did some freestanding retail site selection. And so one day Peggy says, hey, have you ever heard of Danville? And I'm like, well, duh. I grew up in Martinsville. Who hasn't heard of Danville? She goes, well, Harvey's put the racetrack there under contract. And all I could think of was Martinsville Speedway or South Boston. I'd never heard of VIR. It closed when I was 15, thank God, or I would have been lost on Spectator Hill with all the crazy people. But I said, well, sure, I'd love to talk to him. So this is in 1998, and that's kind of early for internet. And I know Harvey's a vintage racer, and he races something called an Elva. And I'm like, what the hell's an Elva? So I'm trying to figure it out and get online, can't find anything, go down early to the biggest Barnes and Noble in New York City, can't find anything on vintage race cars, and just show up into his office, and then I'm spellbound by all the trophies and pictures on the wall and timesheets. And that was my first introduction to vintage racing. And then we went to Lime Rock to the Fall Festival where Bugatti was the feature. And I'm thinking, I'm not sure if this is going to be sustainable for VIR. And then we go to Watkins Glen where Allard is the feature. And I'm like, okay, now we're talking about something with scale and scope and elevation and, you know, size and grandeur that I can kind of get my head around, because I'm supposed to put a business plan together to get our zoning permits and our financing. And so then finally Harvey takes me to VIR, and we go to the famous oak tree, and we're standing under it with Larry Burnett and his daddy Ray with a D10 dozer, getting ready to talk about how to do some excavation around the property. They're raising cattle on the property. So there are cows lowing in the background. Maybe some of you have seen the 1998 video of me doing a tour of what the track looked like back then. And then we redid it this year of a then and now, what it looks like today on the same drive line with the 1998 split screen. But Harvey's standing there and his New York City finest talking to these two farmers. And do you remember what you said to them?
You mean about the goose?
The goose and the dog.
That dog don't know. Anyhow, these were two very, very nice, very, very local Southern men. And I was and still am a Jewish man from New York City. I'm the last. I mean, if we couldn't get two people on opposite ends of the spectrum in one place at one time, that was it right there. As we're standing underneath this beautiful oak tree, and it was a magnificent 300-year-old oak tree, the famous oak tree turn. I said, well, I know that you and I come from different places, but I'm going to try to be here for a long time. And I'm going to be the goose, and I'm going to lay some golden eggs. And if you are as good as they tell me you are going to enjoy the golden eggs for the next decade or more. But the one thing I don't want to do is to look at our bills. Give me a number, make it reasonable. I'll check you every so often, and I'll never look back. So don't kill the goose that's going to lay the golden eggs.
That's right. Harvey, hold your phone still. You're all jiggly.
Okay, sorry. Anyhow, what he did is exactly that. We ended up having a 20-year or almost 20-year relationship that essentially was unique, because not only he spoke with a real Southern drawl, but he was smart as a whip, and he was an artist with his bulldozer and motor grader.
So Harvey tells him to be gentle with his billing and don't shoot the goose who lays the golden egg. And Larry steps back, he goes, Harvey, that dog don't hunt.
That's what he said.
And that became Harvey's catchphrase from then on.
No, we were friends thereafter. And
well, you stayed at his farm during the runoff.
Yeah, I
October,
did.
Right?
Yeah, he became, you know, a local man whom I respected very much, and he respected me, and we had a great relationship. But I remember when we had to move 50,000 cubic yards of material to flatten the main paddock. And it was so cold on that day. I'll never forget it. My nose was freezing. It was in March. And he said to me, so Harvey, I got an idea. We don't have to move that much soil after all. I said, well, give me your idea. I'd like to hear it. And he told me what it was. And it was so simple, it was elegant. The trucks that you park now for your haulers, your car haulers, you notice that they're lined up from racetrack side to the pond side. it was originally planned that they might be going the other direction, which of course would make them very difficult. But from the left side to the right side, that grade is ever so slight and doesn't affect you guys at all. And we never looked back because we did it his way and saved 50,000 cubic yards of
Oh
earth.
my God. And there were 2 sinkholes, remember? It was like quicksand.
Yeah, well, they were
Where are those sinkholes? Because most of us have been in that paddock. So just out of curiosity, where are the sinkholes that aren't there anymore?
They're gone now, but I think Harvey,
Yeah.
if you're facing from the racetrack up to the pond, the biggest one was just between the entrance to the paddock and where the pond is,
Okay.
right?
Yep.
Is that where you remember? And the second one was really small. And I think that was over to the false grid.
Okay.
Well, the racers might be interested in knowing about the subtleties of the actual racetrack itself, because I think as drivers, they might want to know why we did what we did on not changing the configuration of the actual racetrack's directions and turns, either the radii or otherwise. If anything, because it was only 27 feet, which is three lifts of a barber green at 9 feet, we had to expand it 3 feet in order to get the full 30 at that time. I know you've done other things since then.
Well, you
Connie.
and I did 30 on most of it, and then 33 down the back straight and 33 down the front straight.
Yep.
But everything else, we just went to 30 because you didn't want to straighten out the turns, which even when we widened it, we respected that center line.
Which is crucial for the historic integrity of the racetrack. And if those who don't know, the motor grader, the tightest radius of a motor grader determined certain turns on the track.
Yeah, oak tree.
Oak tree being particular, since it was too big to take down, so they said, what the hell, we'll go around it. And that's where Oak Tree Turn became what it was.
Yeah, turn 10 became where it was. That was supposed to be a long straight. There's a big rock there. And so they put in the S's and they said, well, that might be interesting, and just followed the lay of the land and avoided that rock.
So it's sometimes nature by itself did a beautiful design unto itself. The back straight, you should all know, is a very interesting spot that would have forced some of the GTP cars and the really faster Porsches to do an airplane imitation. So what we did back there was took about 13 inches in compression out of that dip just before the uphill and the left turn at the braking zone down there. That permitted you to get in there at full throttle without getting so light that you got yourself in deep trouble.
I'm going to have to beg to differ, and I may be incorrect, but we had Bob Aiken come out with the 962, remember? And I never knew Bob Aiken or 962 at the time. And he drove the track, and Harvey knew him from New York, and he came down. And he said, all you need to do is get about 2 inches out of there. And we did, and to save the splitters and to, protect it from getting airborne. But when you said 13 inches of compression, I didn't know if you were meaning something different than what I was saying.
Well, we only took a few inches, but it was more than 2 inches, Connie. It was more than 2 inches because 2 inches would not have done it. And we had a little conversation, but no change in the configuration of the track other than that little subtlety, which I'm sure if you're driving a GTP car and you're Bob Aiken, you're coming down there about 180 to 190, maybe even approaching the big 200, and you do not want to have your suspension compressed there.
No.
That would not be a good result. As it released, that's when you first have to hit the brakes, and you might right there do an airplane imitation, which fortunately we haven't had anything like that. You haven't either, have you?
No.
Okay.
We have a lot of offs there, but
well, that I can't help.
In that manner. Yeah.
So
We take some questions.
when you all were building the track, yeah, as I mentioned before, we were all really blown away by the quality of what we saw the first time we showed up and every time since. One of the stories I heard when I first came was from the gas pumps weren't installed or working yet. So you nicely arranged for a gasoline truck to be there to provide gasoline for us, which we really appreciated. Well, the nice young man pumping the gasoline told me this story that he had helped pour a lot of the concrete curbs on the track. And he told the story, I've often wondered whether it was true or not, that he and others were made to go practice pouring curbs out in the woods before they were allowed to pour the real curbs on the track. Now, is that an old wives' tale or is that a real story?
I'll let Connie do that one.
I mean, Harvey, he's talking about Chip King because he
I
was a
know.
fuel supplier and our concrete guy. It was like 4 musketeers. We had Larry, me, Chip, and a guy, Carter Henderson, who did all the underground work. But I don't remember them doing it in the woods. I think they may have done some practice forms because we borrowed a design that had been originated, I think, in Lime Rock. And you and Chip perfected it. It was basically a long piece of metal, and they would form that in the shape of the curb and then anchor it into the ground. And then they would lay the concrete and put 2x4s into it. They were all connected. And then when the concrete would just start to set up, all these guys would jerk the forms out and it would leave the dental curbing that's still behind the green and yellow FIA curbing. But it sounds totally normal for you to have them practice in the woods.
I will tell you how that happened. He heard the story of the fellow that built the South Paddock concrete wall, and how I went bonkers when he didn't do it right. It wasn't done perfectly. So I warned him that if you build those curbs in place and they are not right, it will not be a good day for you. So please go somewhere and practice. And yes, it's like a giant saw, bent and pinned, and they poured the curb on the inside. And just before it really set completely, they'd pull off the metal and it was perfect.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, cool. Well, thank you. Well, that's great. So we heard about the bulldozer. So the original track apparently was done with a bulldozer carving some kind of path. But how did that work when you had to resurrect it?
Well, since the basic track was still there, alligator, of course, cracked, grass growing through various spots. We used that as the template, if you will, and that was it was milled, and then we were going to go down to the stone and put stone back in, but the moment we got to one section, which is just before the S's, the uphill S's, we got down to the stone, and then we started to get some water in the coming up through the stone. And whether you believe it or not, to the left of that bridge, just where the bridge is, to the left of it was a swamp, which of course is no longer there. And that ended the permeation of the water coming up.
Yeah, that's where we hit what Larry would call that live and fill. And I think the engineers called it organic fill. But yeah, so
it was
stopped milling and just literally laid the base on top of the original track, marking the center line, and then we paved over that.
But that was actually, thank God, it stopped us before taking too much of that top off. So once it was sealed, it was good. But once you opened up the wound, then you were back in trouble again. So we used the base as the template and paved over the existing with a really thorough tack coat that went down before the paving took place.
Yeah.
And
Harvey,
Connie,
What?
one of the things I think is important, most people didn't realize it, but we didn't use that finished track once it was paved because I was fearful of the issues that came with not allowing it to cure.
Yeah. No, that
And,
was brilliant. I mean, we finished the paving job in November, I think, of 98, and we didn't race on it till March 17, 2000.
Imagine leaving that untouched for that length of time.
Yeah, so contrary to that, which absolutely verifies your story, when APAC repaved, and many of the APAC guys' fathers paved it in 57, and then again in 99, and then again when we repaved in 14, and or their sons. So there was a lot of family history there, and that was the only time we needed to pave the track. And then when it failed and started to crack before we even drove on it, and we called them back and kind of went back and forth for the better part of a year and ended up in a lawsuit, which subsequently settled. But when Wayne Turner from Raleigh came out to repave, because it turns out APAC is owned by the largest paving material company in the world, Oldcastle in Ireland. And nobody wanted to repave VIR and risk pissing off Oldcastle. So Wayne Turner says, I'll pave your damn racetrack. I've never paved a racetrack, but we got Brian Prowl, the foremost racetrack asphalt expert nationally, if not globally. And he ran the show, and Wayne and his people followed them. And we had points of failure where we had to take up every bit of the APAC asphalt because whatever you leave in place will just bleed through eventually. And we got to spots that the ground fell out from under us, just like in 98. And we had to do FDR, soil cement, full depth reclamation to stabilize that earth. And it's not going anywhere now. But we encountered the same thing in 2013 that you and I encountered in 1999.
So to me, it's amazing that original paving lasted so long with all the traffic, all the cars, all the downforce cars, especially that have run on VIR. Do you attribute that to the fact that you left it, basically cure for more than a year? Or
I think it's twofold. I mean, one was the cure time obviously helped us when we repaved. We had 3 days between finishing the job and putting IMSA on track. I mean, it was the scariest moment of my life besides having my son. So Harvey made that decision and put that into the timeline, and that was beautiful. The other thing was in 98, the DOT and asphalt formulas were all changing at that time.
Yeah.
And because the mix was so different, everybody was kind of overachieving to not fall under specification. And we probably got the best asphalt produced under these EPA regulations because they were still figuring it out. So we got good old stuff instead of new crappy stuff.
okay.
Yeah, the material was materially different when the repavement took place, but also regrettably, I spent 40 plus years as a real estate developer paving shopping center parking lots and truck mix for the back area where we get deliveries, and I have had my share of
Yeah.
failures, and so I knew what to avoid. And so it turns out that was really the longest run of any racetrack I know without a repaving.
Yeah,
Because
it's
of it.
still a record. And me being tied to Harvey's hip and him being so free, with his learning curve. I mean, we were just a great complement to take things, forward quickly because we would divide and conquer and just reconnect throughout the day, because we were just running hard all the time.
Right.
We had a
So-
war room, by the way, Bill.
Okay.
It was a war room, yeah,
No?
full-size war room. And in that room, there were boards and what needed to be done and when it needed to be done by. And
All
And
on paper. Most of which I had Harvey autograph and date, and we've saved in our history boxes. So one of these days in the museum, you'll get to see Harvey's Mad Ramblings autograph.
So Connie, you mentioned Four Musketeers. Say a little bit more about who the Four Musketeers were and how that worked.
Well, I was living in New York at the time in Hudson Valley. And of course, Harvey was in the city. And we start traveling down to VIR, and what became every 3 weeks became every 2, every 1. And then I finally got to move back home close to my parents in Martinsville. And we assembled our core group, and it was myself, Chip King, who you referenced, who put in our fuel tanks and did all the concrete work, all the curbing. He did the bridge abutment for the railroad cars that Harvey sourced to be our bridge foundation. And Larry Burnett, This Dog Don't Hunt. And the last one being Carter Henderson, who was a local site work guy who mostly did underground utility works. He put in all our water and, at the time it was septic, electric lines. We put extra conduit everywhere we went underground. We laid a pipe for extra conduit. And Carter would tell people, if you walk around at VIR, you're walking on something I've done. And he later bought a Mustang and joined VIR Club and drove with us for years. And all of Larry's children have been married at VIR. When his daddy died, he called and said, we're burying daddy at the farm today. Do you think y'all could have, 15 minutes of quiet time? And it was an Audi Club day. And I think it was a Monday. And I talked to the Audi Club people and they said, oh, absolutely. And so at the appointed time, we went silent. They played taps. We could hear it at the track, and we just stayed silent until they made a noise and we went live again. I mean, everybody stood at attention. Oh, it made me cry, but we're close.
That's very cool.
Good, really good people. The team that we put together were extraordinary people, extraordinary human beings who did their job so well that it was hard to ever find, a fault that you could even criticize. It was amazing.
Well, the timeline was amazing. You all went from kind of idea, or at least that signature after your, plane flight that you just talked about, to being open in what, less than 2 years?
Oh yeah, 14 months.
No, 22 day to day. Well, from when I started to the day we opened, it was 22. From the time we started the work of the track, it was probably 14 months.
Yeah.
We got
That's
all
pretty...
our permits in 2 meetings.
Oh yeah, I got to tell them the story. For me, that's one of the fabulous stories of my life. As a developer of, 50 plus years being a developer, knowing the pain and suffering it takes to get anything approved, a doghouse, for God's sake, to get it approved, you need to go through all kinds of machinations. And one night, after having met with Jerry Lovelace, that nice gentleman who guided us through, Connie and I showed up at the planning board meeting. And I think I got up and made a presentation and said, my name is Harvey Siegal, and I'd like to resurrect the Virginia International Raceway. I'm a racer, a developer, and I think you'll like the job we do.
He was the 17th person to tell them that story.
And they said, Mr. Siegal, we've got about 15 people come in here and tell us they're going to do just that. I said, well, I'm sorry that they didn't do it, but in a way I'm glad, because I am going to do it if you let me. And they said, well, we'll take some time. Okay, so I sat down with Connie. We were there. There were a few other things, garage extensions and things like that. And Connie and I looking to get approval for resurrecting the VIR. So about 15 minutes later, they come back and they said, Mr. Siegal, and I jump up and I walk up to the podium and I said, yes, sir. I said, we've talked about it and we're going to let you do that.
That's exactly what happened.
Wow.
And I'm saying to myself, They didn't say any more, so I went back to the seat and I sat down next to Connie, and I turned to her very quietly and I said, "What does that mean?"
Yeah.
And then we
My
didn't
dad
say
was
anything.
there.
And then they called the fellow who was going to get a garage extension up next. And we walked outside, and Jerry Lovelace came by, who had guided us up to put us on the agenda. And I said, "Jerry, what did we get? What was that? I've never been in a meeting like that before. What happened?" He said, "It means you can go do it." He said, "Make sure you bring us plans for any buildings you want to build with a architect's stamp so they don't fall down. But other than that, you're free to go." And talk about a dream for a developer. That was a developer's wet dream. You can't possibly get any better than that. No environmental impact statement, no storm drainage calculations, no noise attenuation, no,
This is going to be on YouTube.
it doesn't matter. You can't do
Yeah,
that
because
anymore.
you're gone.
anyway.
I'm still here trying to build stuff.
The point is that you can't do it anymore, but that was a time when it was a wonderful opportunity, and we did not disappoint them. We built them something that they're proud of.
Yeah.
We did it right, and we didn't cut corners, and we did do it correctly.
Yeah.
And they should be happy that we did it as good as we did. We're
Well,
proud
no,
of
they
it.
are. I mean, I think to our culture, we always told them what we were going to do, asked them the best way to present that for their approval, did what we said, and it's not changed a whole lot over time. The EQ is a little harder to get through, but that's because they turned it over to the state. But our working relationship is still really, really good. And they all still ask about you. So Harvey,
Well, that's nice.
Mark and Southside.
So a bit of history. One question that came in relates to the Oak Tree Tavern. And what was that building before? And tell us a bit about the history of that very nice building.
Go ahead, Connie, you can do that one.
Oh God, that was Harvey's thing. You know, he restored, is it a 1930s farm in New Jersey? Is it
It's
1930?
1776 it was built, and the second section was 1870.
Okay, well, I'm way off on that. So, and then the tavern, the last expansion was, you see the 1876 signature on the wall in the blue room, but its original foundations were in 1840s. And I had an 1840s farmhouse in New York, so we knew better. But Harvey said, no other racetrack has this. Let's make it right. And then you worked with the master craftsman from Pennsylvania. I can't remember his name.
I forgot his name myself.
$6,000 later, we opened. So.
Let's put it this way: the tavern was an antebellum mansion designed by what was the?
It was from the Foote family and the Bruce family, which owns Berry Hill and had VIR. So those working farms had common ownership back in the day. I still want to resurrect that dairy barn.
Well, you can do that. That'll be fun. But the one thing I would have told you, that by not asking this nice gentleman for the history and leaving him alone, he rebuilt all those windows so they really work. Those floor to ceiling windows are all on counterbalances and actually function.
Right.
Even the doorbell rings as it did with a little wire, a copper wire that goes down over the stairways and makes a little ring. I mean, he did it right. He rebuilt all those the side panels for the main the front entrance, and by leaving him alone, he did it correct. He didn't need supervision. He simply needed to have the opportunity to do it, and he was delighted to do so. and
A
the
lot
rest
of
is
all
history.
the doors are original. They were covered in so many layers of paint. He dipped those and got them back to original.
Wow.
And your buddies, I know it was Ball and Ball Hardware, donated the hinges and all the window latches and everything that was period correct. Harvey worked with Ralph Lauren's decorator. He sent us a decorator to help pick some of the original furnishings and the colors, which we've kept all true to the original form of Ralph Lauren. So we have Ralph Lauren red, Ralph Lauren blue, and our creative room naming. But we dropped the ceiling a foot and added the HVAC, electric, plumbing, and there was nothing there. I mean, there were thousands of bees. And so when you go into the tavern to your left, there's a picture of what we started with, which was a fairly dilapidated structure and what it looks like today. And Harvey sourced, through this gentleman, salvage yards to get the wavy glass, period correct glass. The night we were opening in 2000, we had a pool table, which we had built. It was more like a snooker table, but somebody hit a pool cue, a ball through the one of the windows and cracked a pane. So I called my now ex-husband who was in New York, and we had 1840s house, and we had a lot of wavy glass, in our basement for replacement. I said, I need a pane of glass this size. And it's before 9/11. So he gets on the airplane with a pane of glass and comes in and fixes it in the tavern as we're having our grand opening.
Wow.
So it's got a bunch of stories to tell. I hope it doesn't tell them all.
Well, yeah, well, all of us have been there, so it's great to get some of that. I think I know the answer to this, but the obvious question people want to know, can you replace the oak tree? Because those of us that were there when the original 300-year-old one was there clearly miss it. The track doesn't look the same when you come up over the climbing S's and look down toward oak tree, obviously. And I know the answer to this, but a lot of people don't. So tell us the situation with the oak tree replacement, if you will.
This is
Well,
the
I'll take
this is the
but-
first place. This is the first place where Connie and I diverge.
Yeah, yes. Harvey is a tree lover, and if I got to follow my heart, I'd put the oak tree back, and Harvey wanted to actually transplant one that was fairly old, but still manageable to move and replant. But I mean, the honest, straight truth is that FIA will not approve it because it got grandfathered in. We couldn't do the MSUN pro racing that we do today, which I think, using in one of Harvey's early lines, is driving the lines of racing legends or create new ones of your own. I mean, Harvey wanted to resurrect VIR as a beautiful club track that his wife and family would enjoy going to. And having no history in racing whatsoever, I thought that we needed to be more, bigger, better, because it's such an important track. And I very quickly realized the reverence of the racing community for this track and for historic tracks and big natural terrain road courses. And we just couldn't sustain that. It wouldn't be right to do it just on a club model. So we had to raise our standards, not only for the safety of all those we love, but also for the FIA, which we've got a grade 2 license. There's not that many tracks that do. And, that would be one of the requirements to keep that license. We did replant an actual acorn. So the oak tree that's outside the turn between the bleachers at turn 11 was grown from, it's a son of oak tree. So Mike Allen, who worked in our maintenance department at the time, is also a racer, and his wife, Julie, had taken a handful of acorns and planted them at his parents' house, who were also vintage racers. And 3 of them survived. And when they read in the local paper that our cloning effort of the oak tree, which we tried 14 different cloning protocols and none of them worked because it was so old, that failed. They said, well, you don't have one. We have 3. Come over and pick one to replant. And so we put it in the same visual outside the turn. And, it's not perfect, but it's the best I felt we could do.
We just have to wait 100 years for it to be the same size, that's all.
Oh, 2 or 3.
So speaking of history, Hogpen and some of the names, but let's start with Hogpen. Tell us where those came from, because there's got to be some interesting history there.
There was a hog pen, odd hog pen.
Yeah.
Was that when
What
you
it was.
first got there, Harvey? Was that
Yeah,
hog
yeah,
pen
there was a
there?
hog pen.
In addition to the cow pasture with the cows and so on, there was also a hog pen at the top of the hill, huh?
No, the hog pen was long gone, except the remnants of it was there. But in the first iteration of VIR, the hog pen turn had a real hog pen
Yeah.
Okay.
with hogs.
And there were cornfields off of drivers left from 17 to 1. And so the motorcycles, especially when they would go out, would go whack, 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 whack through all the cornfields. I mean, when Harvey first got there, you know, he's a New York City boy. There were feeding troughs on the front straight. And so we're down there with Larry, you know, looking around their cows, you know, feeding and everything. And I pick up a cow patty and throw it at Harvey. He's like, oh, poo. I'm like, oh, it's, you know, just dried grass. But
Yeah, right.
he got used to it in a pretty short time.
Good. Well, if we look at some of the more recent history, what are some of your favorite events that have happened, or favorite races and events that have happened since you got the track open?
Harvey, what do you, I mean, I know you want to talk about homecoming.
Well, I think you're talking about the 50th anniversary or homecoming.
Well, we first started with homecoming. That was kind of an early vision that we held on to for a long time with the black and white. And that
Yeah.
went past the 50th, and it's kind of gone by the wayside now. And
What happened to the Gold Cup?
yeah, Gold Cup, we have turned that event over to SVRA, you know, our old race group with Heacock, and they're not really respecting the black and white the way you and I liked. And I'm hoping to, you know, work on that and bring that back around again. So Harvey's, which I really loved, was patterned after the reunion at Goodwood. And they all have to dress in period clothing to get into the paddock. And we wanted to do something similar to that, but not quite so demanding. So Harvey came up with the idea of you had to wear black and white. I mean, because everybody can do that. So all the participants wore black and white. And we had a pig picking with Jerry Lovelace's bluegrass band on Friday when people arrived. We had a big banquet. I mean, it was a big, fun social event. But as we, you know, grew and vintage racing morphed, it was just hard for us to maintain it as an in-house event. And so we ended up turning it over to SVRA, and they still have the banquet, but only a few people dress in black and white. The first year, Bert Levy came as a nun. So that was really fun.
I love him. He's such a wild man.
You know, that first year, I think he did it with what was the precursor to VDCA. And it was Alex Quattlebaum and David Whiteside. And David had just bought seat belts for his, I don't know what it was, like a 50-something Falcon, or I don't know. But on his way home, he went off the road into a tree and passed away with those damn seat belts sitting beside him. Remember? And so we still see the hats of VIR 2000 Homecoming. And it was branded that for years, and then kind of morphed into Gold Cup. And, you know, now it's still known as Gold Cup, but we do it in conjunction with SVRA.
Interesting. Okay. A question that just came in relates to change gears a bit. You know, the friendly staff that we see at the food stand and throughout the facility, you know, somebody commented that we see a lot of the same people year after year. How do you maintain, you know, those friendly staff, and so we get to see the same people every year we come down?
Whoever asked that question, God bless you for noticing. We absolutely love our culture, and we work very, very hard at our culture, which Harvey and I started together and maintains to this day. You know, we just went through the whole traction entrepreneurial enterprise system, you know, operating system, whatever you want to call it. And we kind of did it in a semi-formal manner, but we recognized our culture and set our forward goals. I restructured the company last year, promoted Kerrigan to president and COO, combined resort and track under one umbrella. And we just all got together and acknowledged that our number one dedication is to the legacy of VIR. And as Harvey used to say, you know, this is just our turn. I mean, there were people before us who made it great, and there'll be people after us that hopefully do so as well. And our staff believes that, and they are really dedicated every day to contributing in some way to the legacy of VIR, whether it's through a guest experience, their maintenance of the curbing, or whatever it is. I mean, we all walk to the same drumbeat, and we like it, and we love each other. And even in these bad times, I mean, people have a, dance in their step and are glad to be there.
That's great.
Being caretakers of a magnificent, historic, iconic place that gives nothing but pleasure and enjoyment to the people who visit it is a very cool thing, no matter what.
You and I both come from shopping center development, and building a Rite Aid, okay, that pays some bills, and Harvey did much bigger things than I did, but, nobody really wants to go to that. They have to go to that. At VIR, nobody comes to us, including Northern New Jersey Porsche Club, unless you choose to. And that's the most rewarding thing for me, is every single person I meet every day made a positive choice to come to VIR. And when I get the opportunity to acknowledge that, as I call it, making howdies, not if anyone who's ever seen me on track knows I'm walking all the time, whether it's picking up trash or talking to staff or meeting the guests or whatever. I'm out making howdies and finding out what they like, what we can do better, how has their experience evolved, that kind of thing. And we love your feedback, and we love your questions and things like tonight.
And it's a long haul from up there.
It's a long haul.
Yeah, tell us about it. It's a day's drive each way. So
I know.
But yeah, we all many of us have done that at least once a year for since you opened. So talking about where we are with the track now, Connie, what's the biggest challenge you see running the track and going forward?
Well, right now, we're just getting through the damn COVID-19. So, I mean, we have, as our good team does, we've rallied together and found ways to operate within the governor's guidelines. And Virginia's governor is one of the most conservative, which probably is doing us more favors than some days we want to acknowledge. But we're open just to small private events. And, small is a variable number, but we know every day who's coming through the gate. And if they're not on the list, the phone rings. So we're making every effort to keep our staff, all the guests, everyone, tracked, safe. And the guests are so respectful, because all you have to do is say to anyone who's, kind of stepping out of boundaries, to say, do you want to be the guy who causes the scrutiny to deny this opportunity to tomorrow's guests? And they're like, no. So it's been, pretty rewarding going through these bad times, because we've gotten to know our customers so much better, because there's so much more we have to communicate and go through. And you really realize very quickly, like, who wants to be on the same team or who doesn't, and if you want to be on the same team, we'll find a way to make it work, like we always have tried to do since 1998. And that's been, even painful sometimes, but a pretty fun exercise. And to comment just briefly on the food and beverage, last year we outsourced right before the runoffs. We didn't finalize it till December, but we did an arrangement with a group called Up to Par Management out of Lexington, Virginia. We have a new food and beverage director, John Clark, who came to us from the Seattle Zoo. And I thought, well, that's kind of cool, interesting, because they says we have lots of concessions we had to get right. We had to get quick. We had to, refine menus. They did all the catering for Bill Gates Foundation, concerts at night. I mean, kind of everything we do on steroids. And even in COVID times, everybody was so excited to open, and then we got shut down. And so we're doing curbside delivery, and now we're opening limited, but we're kind of finding our way. And so, yes, you'll still see Big Wendy and Pat and everybody at concession, but you'll see a few new faces too. And everybody, they're just so excited to have you all back.
Well, we're looking forward to seeing you in the fall for sure. So a question that just came in was, a favorite memory, at the track. You've obviously spent a lot of time there, both of you. So what's kind of top of head or top of your list of favorites?
All right, I'll give you two quick ones that are related because just top of mind, as you said. So the very first day we opened, March 17, 2000, it was a SCCA double regional event, and Harvey and I were there, and no one had been on track, and we're walking it, and we're going up to turn 10, and there are skid marks everywhere. The grass is torn up. People have hit the tire barrier. We're like, oh my God, look what they did to our baby. And then they came out and swept the track, and it was gone. So we're like, okay, this will work just fine. And then 20 years later, Harvey shows up at the runoffs in October. Our first time at the runoffs, we were so proud and so excited. And it was a great event. And the feedback, the short version feedback was, this is the way the runoffs used to be and should be. And we were just couldn't have been more tickled. And Harvey shows up, and he's having lunch with the guy who used to have our consignment race car shop and staying at Larry's barn. And, it's just like old times, but 20 years later. And it was really fun. It's just, as Harvey says, if I ever need an ego boost, I'll just come home. So it was nice to have you back.
I have one
Go
thought.
for it.
It was, I don't know if anybody uses the false grid, the covered false grid when you guys go out. Do you use it?
Yes.
Okay. On my first race out there, I haven't been on the track at speed. Of course, I know where all the curbs are and the barriers are and the flag stations, but I've never driven my race car on the track. I was too busy actually building the track and doing all the things that we needed, and then it being interviewed and all that stuff. So I go out there for my first trip, and of course, I'm so slow. I mean, I know where everything is, but everybody's been 2 sessions out, and I got, I'm the number 46. If you know what the false grid looks like, number 46 is the last person against the fence out in the sun.
Yeah.
So all I can tell you is that I
was pissed.
cooking out there in that sun, and I'm looking at the false grid, which of course I thought was a really good idea, and I expected to enjoy the benefits of it. All I could think of was, there has to be a better way for me to, I gotta go faster, because the last thing I want to do is to be cooking in the sun out here as the slowest poke on the game.
So the reason that the bathrooms are there, which Harvey's apartment is there, the HQ, Harvey quarters, is because he says, I always get so nervous when I'm on the grid, I have to go pee. And so he built bathrooms right by the false grid. There you go. Harvey, remember the first time I passed you on track?
Yes.
I wonder if we have that story the same.
Oh, sure.
So
Well,
I had never been to a racetrack, much less raced. And so I was invited by Skip Barber. They had an empty seat, cancellation, come take race school. And I'm like, okay. I mean, because the only time I've been on track at speed literally was with Paul Newman before that. And so I take race school. I'm hooked. So I get a Datsun 510. This guy bought the car. Peter Krause found the car for me. Some guy bought it in Michigan. I called him every day and I said, how's my car? So finally one day he called and said, come get your car. He bought it for the BRE paint scheme. And Peter was convinced this should be my car and that I could beat Harvey in his Elva Courier if I had this car and learned to drive it well.
That's true.
Car, and I worked on it for 3 years. I chased him around. And then finally, I'm coming up in the oak tree and I get around him and he points me by. I was so pissed. So we get into the paddock. I'm stomping my little feet. I'm like, bad word, you. I mean, really? I've chased you for 3 years? And he's like, mechanical failure. I'm like,
Not really. You actually passed me. And there was no way I was going to be able to catch you. And so I'd rather let you go by safely than have him clang me off into the weeds.
into the oak tree. And I think that it was the only time I passed here and the only time I won. I chased him around Road Atlanta. My gear shift came off and I came in and I torn through my glove and I was bleeding and I didn't even know. And he won, but I mean, man, I wanted it. It was fun, Harvey. Thanks for introducing me to my new life.
Yeah, well, it's the best job on the planet Earth, anyhow.
No kidding. I
Yeah.
tell people that all the time. I said, I have the best job on the planet and I have over 300 people making me look great.
So before we wrap up, we have to ask about the Paul Newman story. You brought it up. So tell us about that, because I believe he's one of the famous quotes about VIR as well. So we have to hear about that.
Well, if
That's
it's-
yours, Connie, that's
Yeah.
yours.
Yeah, so I was at the track one day, got a call from a friend in Greensboro who said, you know, I have a special friend I'd like to bring out to the track. Do you have anything available? And I said, yeah, North Course, the South Course has an IndyCar team practicing. And so he said, comes out, shows up with the little Porsche Boxster. He said, that's all I got. You know, let's go out and warm up the tires. He's going to be here shortly. And so we go out and he said, well, why don't you drive? And just like Harvey's story, being outside the false grid, I'm like, well, I've never driven the track. And what? I never drove it? And so I'm like, okay, you know, so I get in, he's telling me what to do. And about the third lap in, I'm going through hog pen much faster than I had been. And I am beet red and sweaty and excited. We pull into pit lane and there's Paul Newman. I'm like, is that your special friend? He's like, yeah. I'm like, okay. So I get, oh, well, Mr. Newman, please, you know, so, oh, thanks, you know. And so he gets in the car and he's strapping in and he's, you want to ride? And I'm like, yeah, sure. You know, so I get in the passenger seat and we take off and we're heading up the North Course cut through, which Harvey and Peter Krause and I designed with golf carts. And I know the line of that very well. And I've seen a lot of people spin out there. And I'm like hitting Paul Newman on the leg. I'm like, you're going to spin, you're going to spin. He's like looking at me and he twitches the steering wheel and takes off like a scalded cat. And I'm like, you're great, you're great. And he's like, stop hitting me. So I sat on my hands the rest of the drive and we did a few laps and came on in. And he said, man, if there's a heaven on earth, it's VIR. And I said, can we use that? He said, absolutely. And he stayed through lunch and berated us for not having Paul Newman salad dressing. And, you know, we just had a large time. He just hung out all day and drove a lot and brought a bunch of friends back and was a super easy guy. And I'm sure a bunch of you have met him because he raced for so long, you know, so prolifically.
Do we have time for one story that I think is worthwhile?
Yes, by all means.
Okay. You have to know that Connie is always working, but she's down there. I happen to be down there and I work 99% of the time. But when I see something that's really important, I make sure I cut my time out to go do it. And on that day, Mercedes-Benz was organized by, got his name now,
Tom Cotter.
Tom Cotter, who organized a big Mercedes-Benz event at the racetrack. And guess what they brought down there? They brought these $450,000 McLaren Mercedes and let all the fanciest and most important journalists in the world come down and drive them and get driven by professional drivers, team racing drivers. And of course, they needed something very special for these very important editors. So they brought car number 722, the famous Mercedes-Benz that won the Mille Miglia in 1957, I guess last year or the year before. Oh, excuse me, 55.
Yeah.
That car is arguably the most important race car Mercedes-Benz ever created, and it's held the record to this day. Of course, they needed somebody special to drive it. It wasn't me. It was Sterling Moss. So Sterling Moss is there driving all of these editors around VIR at great speed, to say the least. And at the end of the day, I said, listen, it's our racetrack. It's ours. It's mine. I want to ride in this thing. So I get in next to Sterling Moss and I put on a helmet. I look around for the seatbelt, no seatbelt, and no roll cage, no roll cage. I said, what are we doing here? He said, well, you've got a marvelous place, old boy. Let's take a ride. Just sit back. You Yanks worry about that stuff. And we take off. He's driving like a scolded cat, as Connie so rightly indicated they do when they get there. And he's scaring the crap out of me. He's driving it like we're in a race. And by the time he gets to Oak Tree, he has demonstrated to me with his hand motion, because it was so loud you couldn't hear anything, each gear that he's in. So he turns around Oak Tree in first, if you can believe that, then takes second, and then third, and then fourth. We're going 150 miles an hour. I have a octogenarian in the driver's seat. I'm sitting next to him. There's no roll bar, no seat belt, and we're going 160 miles an hour. And I'm saying to myself, we're going to die. We're both going to die. And although my wife was not very amused by the comment, I thought to myself, real quietly, well, if I'm going to go, this is a good place to go. I'm at VIR on the back straight with Sterling Moss in car 722, the most famous race car in the world. If I'm going to die, this is okay. Well, my friends got a big chuckle, and maybe all you Porsche guys would understand that. At least those with nice older Porsches, like
Yes.
I would have driven.
You had a Porsche tractor.
I did. But for my family members, they weren't so amused. That's my story.
That's a
That's
great,
true.
that's a great story, and probably a perfect place to wrap up. I do want to pass along some of the comments that have come in, people who are, saying we can't wait to get back, people commenting on how wonderful the facility is, and one of the reasons we all want to come back. Obviously, the track is probably first and foremost, but the fact that it's always in, premier condition is a big part of that, along with all the history and the fact that you've preserved all that history. We really appreciate. And we really thank you very much for the time tonight. I'm going to pass it back to Shannon to wrap up. But personally, Harvey and Connie, let me thank you for taking the time this evening. And on behalf of all of our members, thank you. And Shannon, I'll turn it back to you.
And I would just like to thank you for always being such a great supporter of VIR. And when you're there, everybody's so happy. It's one of our biggest events of the year. We look forward to it every year. I know one year, for some reason, it didn't work out and you were still
Right.
Please come back, come often, bring your friends.
Great.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Harvey, Bill, and Connie. This was a really interesting evening for me, as VIR is definitely one of my favorite tracks, only to the Glen and Equal. So thanks everybody for getting on the call tonight. This again will be available on our YouTube channel, website, and Facebook page. And we'll have another event on the 30th from the Brumos collection. So again, thank you, Harvey and Connie. We can't wait to see you again, and hope everyone has a great night.
Thank you.